Could you use your mic, please?
I feel like it's a small enough room. We should just zoom in. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. And hopefully everybody had a great Thanksgiving and we're ready to start December and be back to work. So I'm going to call this meeting of the Policy and Innovation Committee to order. It is Monday, December 2nd, 2024. And we'd love to start, as always, with the pledge, if you'd join me. Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. And if the clerk would take roll, please.
All right, good morning, everyone. Directors, when I call your name, please indicate your presence. Director Desmond. Here. Jones, absent. Nicely. Here. McCauley. Here. Zaragoza, absent. Schaefer.
Here.
Soon. Here. Thomas.
Here.
Vega, absent. Vice Chair Jadon Calvillo.
Present.
Chair Gallardo.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. Next on our agenda is public comment, public communications. This is an opportunity for anyone from the public to comment on an item that is not on our agenda. Do we have any speakers for public comment this morning?
There's no public comment.
All right, thank you. Then we will move on. Then this is also the opportunity for anyone to disclose if there's any conflict of interest on any item on our agenda this morning. All right, thank you. Well, seeing none, we will move on. Also wanted to let you know, I have a multiple commitment today, and so I'll be slipping out a little bit earlier. And thank you, Vice Chair Alice Dowden-Calvillo, who will take over for me through the meeting. Well, now we'll move on to our consent calendar. These items are intended for one motion, but you can remove anything for a separate discussion. Does any director wish to remove an item? All right, great. Seeing none, anyone from the public wish to pull an item?
No one from the public wishes to remove an or make a public comment.
Great, then I will look for a motion.
Thomas move approval. Dowden Calvillo second.
Thank you. We do have do we have one director by
Director Vega is going to be joining online, but she will not be able to vote as
Okay,
we're not
so
under
we'll do
AB
it large.
2449.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Now, our first action item on the agenda, item 4, is the request for proposal for Financial Audit and Transportation Development Act funds. And Carolyn Payne will be our presenter. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, members of the committee. The item before you, that right? Staff is seeking authorization to release a request for proposals to procure independent financial audit firms or auditors to conduct SACOG's annual financial audit, transit fund audits, and to procure independent financial audit firms on behalf of transit agencies and Capital Area Regional Tolling Authority, CARTA, the newly created authority, to conduct their financial audits. The total budget for this exercise is not to exceed 2.2 million for a 5-year contract term. Now, SACOG has a policy that the first 3 years the contract is signed, and then the option to extend it for an additional 2 years. The current engagement with SACOG has 3 audit firms for SACOG financial audits for transit operators, and this was signed in 2020 for a 5-year term, which is coming to a completion in 2025. The cost for that contract over the cost of that 5-year period is 1.6. So that's why the new RFP will not exceed 2.2 million. And that's an increase in anticipated 12% in increase in cost. We've also added CARTA, and SACOG is administering the new funds from SB 125. That's the through CalSTA. So those are some of the services that we'll be procuring for. The table in the staff report shows all the 5 services that we'll go out to procure and what they will entail. Now, SACOG is using this opportunity to also assist the small transit agencies for their transit fund financial audits. Sometimes they're not able to have all the resources to do their financial audits. If their financial audits are part of the TDA, then we will assist them. They will reimburse some of those costs. SACRT and YOLO TD will use this process also to procure for their own financial audits and single audits as well. SACRT will be using this process for their financial and pension audits, and YOLO TD will use it for their financial and single audits when they receive their federal funds. Same is the case with Carter. We expect that the auditors will do all the audits and provide our required reports. They will give us a fairness and of presentation of the agency financial statements and their conformity with all the regulations. They'll also assist the agency staff with any internal controls and established procedures. In the staff report too, we've broken down how the 2.2 million will be expended. The direct cost to SACOG is 1.37, and about 825 is reimbursable to SACOG for the agencies that will leverage some of the process. We will extend this to a large field of audit firms, and we will also invite the transit agents staff in the evaluation process so that they're able to pick the best audit firms for their needs. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the directors on this item? I know, very clear. I think the only question that I had was, how do you determine the agency's portion and our portion? How is?
What we have done is used the last 5 years of expenses from the auditors that we've procured and just increased a small portion of it. They always, when they do the procurement and propose costs, they give us a breakdown of what each of the audit services will cost.
Thank you.
Sure, I
Yes,
have a
Director Shaver.
question. So, what is the chances that you're gonna come back when you come back for the RFP and this is too low? Because 12%, you mentioned you did a 12% increase. Over the last 5 years, we've seen substantially higher costs.
Mhm.
What's the chances this is gonna come back and they're gonna say, well, you know, the lowest RFP is over the budgeted amount?
In the staff report, we've said these are just estimates until we receive the proposals and evaluate them. If they exceed this, then it will be in the interest of the board to know, we'll come back and present what we have found in the field.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. No other questions from directors? Do we have any public comment or questions on this item?
There is no public comment.
Great, thank you. Then I will bring it back for a motion, please. Thank you.
Second.
All right, it does mean Dr. Soon, you got those, great, all right, thank you. Moved and seconded, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you. All right, we're gonna move on to our first information item, and it is our advocacy update, and I'm happy to see Renee DeVeroki here to bring her crystal ball and tell us what's happening. Good morning.
Good morning. I don't know if I have a crystal ball today. Maybe Debbie and Jason and Chris and Kiana do. So good morning, Renee DeVoe, part of your government affairs team. So we'll be having a little bit of a longer presentation today. We'll start off with our federal advocacy update, and then we'll transition over to our state side. So last month we gave a little bit of a preview of what was going on because we met in early November. So what was on the election or on the ballot. So this will be a little bit of a recap and looking out to the year ahead, specifically what some of these changes mean for transportation policy and some of the efforts that we'll be going through. So we'll start off with Devin, if she's ready. It looks like you've got your screen up, Devin.
It worked. Hi all.
Oh, and we can hear you. So we'll go ahead and start with you.
Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Devin Barnhart. Jason Pavlichuk is also on the line. We are SACOG's Federal Affairs advocates in Washington, D.C., and there's been a lot going on. And so we'll just give you a preview of some of the things we're seeing. Crystal ball may be too strong of a word, but we can at least give you some foreshadowing, if nothing else. And why aren't you switching? There we go. Okay, so President-elect Trump has announced that Sean Duffy is going to be the Department of Transportation nominee. He is a former congressman from Wisconsin, also a former lobbyist, but I think most of us would probably know him from his position serving as a Fox News contributor and also a former reality TV star back in the early 2000s and late 90s. And I would say, from what we have seen from him, he doesn't have a ton of transportation experience. He was on financial services in the committee. He was a district attorney back in the state. So it's sort of up in the air about what he might care about. We can glean a little bit of information from the things that we've heard him say on Fox News, but it's not a ton in the transportation space. So some of the big ticket items are concerns around President Biden's investment in electric vehicles, some pro oil and gas industry conversations, some concerns around technology and what that may or may not do, not in the transportation space specifically, it's not transportation technology, but AI writ large. So just some big picture items, but we're going to find out sort of as he goes through this nominations process. He will go around to all the committees, and then he will have a hearing in the committee, and that's probably where we will learn more about sort of what his sense is. Having somebody that's not super familiar with transportation is not something that is unknown to those of us in the transportation space. The DOT secretary occasionally has had transportation experiences, but more likely than not, they are sort of fresh to the space but have experience in government. So we will see what that holds. Congress is a little bit more predictable in the sense that we know a lot where a lot of the players are going. I'm just going to start on the House side. There is one question mark on this House side about who's going to run the Transportation Committee. It will be led by Republicans with a pretty narrow margin of just 2 to 3 seats, depending on, I think, the outcome of just one more race. But it's up in the air about who's going to lead that transportation committee. The current chairman, Rep. Graves, is trying to get in a waiver, and he's up against Crawford. And so they're sort of duking it out. We should know, I would say, by next week who's going to be chair there. And then Larson, who has been the ranking member, will retain that seat. On the Senate side, just a little bit of movement in our space. Senator Whitehouse, who's a big climate person, will be taking over the Democrats on EPW. Banking Committee has a new shakeup, so we'll see what Senator Scott and Senator Warren are both interested in. But I think the thing to note on the Senate side is that we've got folks pretty far on opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of their political leanings leading these committees. And so while transportation has traditionally been very bipartisan, it's going to be an interesting atmosphere to see how these folks work together or if they choose to work together. And then just to flag also on the Senate side, there's new Senate leadership. Senator Thune from South Dakota will be taking over for Mitch McConnell. Senator Thune has been through many transportation bills, has run many bipartisan efforts, and so he is not new to this game, but it's still a little bit up in the air what that means given tight margins in both the House and Senate. To flag why we care about transportation right now specifically is there are 2 bills quickly coming down the pipeline, quickly in Washington, D.C. sense, which means over the course of years. The appropriations bill happens every year. That's our annual funding bill. It's usually about $10 billion or so in transportation funding that's new or different. It's small policy changes, and then most of the earmarks. So any earmarks in the region, those are all coming through that appropriations bill. We did not finish this year's bill. Normally it gets done during this month. Congress wraps it up. They start the next Congress fresh. That's unlikely to happen. So they'll go into next year and they'll do 2 bills at the same time. They'll try to finish the old bill, start the new bill. So for anybody tracking earmarks, We are happy to assist in that endeavor as that bill moves forward. I just realized I spelled earmarks wrong, so I'll fix that on future slides. But that's probably the key for for you folks about what's in that particular bill. We also care because it's an opportunity to change smaller issues, to push funding towards things that we care about. And so Jason and I spend time trying to figure out, can we drive more money to MPOs and to SACOG's priorities in that bill? The other bill, the 5-year authorization bill, this is the big one. We've been spending the last few years talking about the bipartisan infrastructure law. That bill is coming to a close. And so Congress this year, there's a couple more years of funding technically, but Congress this year will start working on the next bill. This bill takes a year to 18 months to write and 18 months to 2 years to pass altogether. So it'll be like over the course of the next Congress, this will be a big focus. These are our big policy changes. It's a large amount of money. It's how SACOG gets the majority of its money and has a host of implications for how the surface transportation runs. That bill, even though we'll be talking about it for the next 2 years, a bulk of the work will happen in this 2025 timeframe as the committees are writing the bill. And so as we're looking at this particular Congress and thinking about those bills, we can make some guesses about what we're likely to see. The last bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law, really opened up a lot of federal money to all kinds of new stakeholders, sort of anyone from city, tribe, all the way up to states were eligible for most programs, including MPOs. But that's probably likely to change in this next bill. We're likely to see a return to more state control. This isn't a good or bad thing, but it is what has traditionally been the process. So on the right-hand side, or on my right-hand side, you can see that it says Congress, federal highways, state DOTs, MPOs. That's their traditional funding process. Most states advocate for us to continue this type of process where it's very clear that they're getting the bulk of the programmatic money. We're also likely to see that those programs are going to be the bulk of the money. You'll see in these upcoming slides where I talk about grants, what's likely to happen there. But just for our purposes, as things have been over the last decade, it's likely that we're going to see those again, absent the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're also likely to see more of a focus on highways over transit and some of the other issues that we really saw propelled under the Biden administration. Folks tend to be interested in things like cutting red tape, streamlining, whether it's environmental provisions or otherwise, just really getting projects out the door quickly tends to be a big focus. One big question that's outstanding that we don't know is going to happen, but it's worth flagging is whether they might try to take back any of the Biden administration funding. Some people have suggested they would like to. It is difficult. It was a bipartisan law by its very moniker. And so you would have to have support to claw back those provisions, but there are ways that a Congress could make that happen. The administration could also slow the awarding of some of that funding. We don't think this is likely, but we're trying to prepare folks that it's something that we're going to be watching. And as sort of we get a clearer picture of what that looks like, we'll be sharing that information. But for now, I think it's safe to say that most of the funding that has gone out the door will likely continue as it was. But we will be keeping an eye on that one as they start having more specific conversations around their priorities. So bipartisan infrastructure law, it's worth looking at this bill just really quickly so we can show you like what will or won't be included next time. Bipartisan infrastructure law was special for many reasons, including all of the dark blue and purple. Those types of funding, so everything from water and electricity, some resilience money, aren't traditionally part of the surface transportation bill, and it's entirely likely those will not be part of this bill coming forward, and it's more likely than not that that will be the case. The question for us is what's going to happen with all the light blue funding that was really focused on surface transportation. And I'm actually going to skip ahead. I'll come back to those. And what we can guess is that while we had these huge increases in funding in surface transportation, mostly in the rail and transit section, but highways also saw really big plus ups, we can guess that we're probably going to go back to the levels that we were around the 2015 mark before bipartisan infrastructure law. So that means that we're probably closer to the lower side. Um, we could be wrong. There's always a factor that is hard to guess, which is the Trump factor, which is that Trump may not be interested in passing a small infrastructure bill. In the last Trump administration, he was very pro, let's have the biggest infrastructure bill we've ever had. And he really pushed it. It didn't come to fruition, but he spent a lot of time talking about it. We haven't seen that to date. That hasn't been a big part of the conversation. And so it's just unclear, sort of, is he going to be in this camp where many sort of traditional Republicans are of spending less, or might he throw his weight behind some sort of larger infrastructure package? And we don't know the answer to that. One other thing to flag about the bill is in the bipartisan infrastructure law, there were many, many, many new grants. This isn't all of them. There are dozens that aren't on this sheet, but just for illustrative purposes, not all of these will continue. One of the other things that Republicans are going to be interested in is streamlining. They have said this many times. They think there are too many grant programs. It's too hard to apply to all of them for every eligible applicant, that there's just an overwhelming amount. So for sure, we're going to see lower numbers besides these types of grants, and we're probably going to see way less of them. I highlighted some of the ones that are likely to continue just for our guessing purposes, but if they're in blue, this is one that either they tend to have bipartisan support or they were already funded previously, and so they're likely to continue. Build, which is also called RAISE, Infra, those programs have been funded for a while at much lower levels, but very likely to continue. Protect grants have had some bipartisan support. We think we'll continue to see those. Smart grants is a question mark. This was a new grant, but has gotten a lot of interest from sort of folks all over the country. So maybe at a lower level could see some sort of technology and innovation grant, whether it's this specific program or not isn't clear. Rural grants and bridge grants are something that Republicans very much support. I think they'll be baked into the program. I don't think they'll be grants. I think there'll be formula money that goes out the door. And then most of the transit and rail grants, I think will continue. It's sort of up for debate about whether all of them will continue, but they have had longstanding support. It will be a big fight about how much money they get. We've seen how much money they will get. We've seen these programs attempt to be eliminated before, and they come back and they usually fund them at some average level compared to what has been done in the past. So we think they'll continue just at smaller numbers. So just to sum up, what does this mean for SACOG? I think it just means, and none of this is different. This is something that happens every time an administration changes, but just for us to think about specifically, it means that we should strategically evaluate our priority asks. Are they a better state ask? Do they have better chance of being funded through a state program? Are they a better federal ask? Might it be something our delegation supports? And so just think through sort of where we're making our asks and to whom. And then same for messaging. We don't necessarily have to change our goals, but we want to potentially change how we talk about them if there are benefits that are more compelling to this particular audience. We saw a big shift in the Biden administration on priorities that they were interested in, including distressed communities. And so we will likely see a shift like that, again, probably focused on getting projects out the door and making sure that they're efficient. And so we'll sort of see a swing in the messaging of what's important. And so we'll try to make sure that our messaging sort of matches who's picking and selecting grants. And then it's always important for us to be working with partners. SACOG has a lot of great partners, including AMPO, NARC, and others that are also working in tandem on pieces that will go into the surface transportation reauthorization. So we're all sort of spending time talking to like-minded MPOs and the associations to make sure that our priorities are included there. There will also be a significant focus on our key delegation members. For a long time, years and years ago, we had Senator Barbara Boxer, who was running EPW committee, and a lot of California priorities were included. We've now had 2 bills without her, or this will be the second bill without her. And so we really need to focus on our delegation members and making sure that we have our priorities included in the things that they are asking for. And so we'll be spending a bunch of time on that. And then, things are sort of interesting and wild when a lot of messaging happens through X, formerly Twitter. And so I would just say, like, we should be prepared for changes. Things will change as people come into their positions and sort of figure out the landscape. They will change as President Trump lays out his priorities. And so we are always adaptable and sort of ready to work on it, but things will change as we get through this process. I think that's it. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
Thank you, Devin. Well, I mean, I'm all in favor of streamlining and reducing red tape and more direct grants and consolidating grant opportunities to simplify things. So I mean, that's good. I know a lot to be seen. But a question I guess I had for James is I know the MPOs collectively in California will probably be doing a lot of outreach to incoming DOT staff and other leadership coming in. I'm sure you will be in when we all go out for cap to cap and maybe a couple days ahead of time or something, a SACOG delegation that would also go around and maybe meet some of the new people, both staff at DOT and other members. I'd certainly be interested in participating in that as well. I think that's really important.
Yeah, and I would just put out there, I've been talking to Vice Chair Soon already about earlier than that, there's one of our associations, the National Association of Regional Councils, is having its annual DC conference. I think it's in February, and I would encourage all of you that are on this committee and interested to attend that. I think it's in February. So that's an opportunity. Cap to Cap's an opportunity. Don't forget too, we will be doing a pre-tour Cap to Cap. So that's a Friday before. So you can add, before or after or during at that point. And given that, maybe you mentioned this, Devin, but I am interested because you gave a really compelling overview last time around, and we also had a really good 5-year look ahead of our budget, right, and potential revenues. We talked about PL funds. Is that, like many things, up in the air at the moment in terms of PL funds? And should we keep pushing? What's your advice to us on trying to resource us to continue to do the work we're doing?
We are spending a lot of time talking about PL funding is so important. And if Jason is on, he will tell you how low the percentage of funding that we get is and how critically important it is that we continue to have this conversation. It maybe isn't as easy as a path if we had a divided House and Senate, Dems and Republicans, you could work one or the other. Like, we have more of an uphill road, but we should not give up on it. And I think one of the things that we're going to talk about, and we have started messaging with folks, is how do we talk about our real outcomes? Like, we shouldn't be talking about it as PL funding. We should talk about it as what are the outcomes that people are seeing. And we talk about ourselves as MPOs too. Our connection to the local level is critically important. We really are the voice of the region, but also the collective voice of all the individual local jurisdictions. And so having some of these conversations to educate folks about what it means, and then also talk about why it's so critically important and what those outcomes looks like, are something we're spending time on. And then Jason, I don't know if you want to talk about your pitch.
Yeah, I mean, I just, you do the math, and PL funding is less than 0.5% of all formula money, yet DOT, when they just simply to write a check for a grant program, they take down 2%. So we're spending less than 0.5% to spend $450 billion. I think that says a lot to a lot of people, and it resonates a different way. And I think that's a message that we're hammering home: is streamlined is important, but also making the best use of your transportation dollars means that you got to plan how to do it. And I think that's a message that resonates across party identification. So we'll be spending a lot of time pushing and working on that as well.
Vice Chair Soon.
Thank you, Chair. This is a follow-up. I think you might have already led into this, but when I look at the typical process, the traditional funding process, and as we move into an administration that is likely to contrast with our state administration, I heard you say, Devin, focusing on outcomes, and maybe that's the answer, but how will we navigate, speaking to our federal delegation, or what federally we can do versus once that money comes into the state, our hands are tied or are they not?
I actually think you guys are in pretty good shape relative to some of the other states. But I'm going to do a two-part. One is, I said on the last slide, be prepared for changes. One factor that could impact California is because California is somewhat seen as a foil to President Trump. There could be implications for sort of larger implications about what federal dollars they want to send to California, right? You could see California money threatened or addressed. We don't know what that might look like, but it's worth knowing that there could be sort of these larger winds that blow from the federal government that have nothing to do with transportation. That being said, we had 4 years working together, working in a bipartisan manner the first time that Trump was in office, and we saw really good transportation money still go out the door and flow. So I don't think that is like a likely issue, but it is worth like for us thinking about sort of just there may be these issues that come up. And then two, for the state level, we do have to still sort of work through the state process. So luckily, any of the money that is suballocated to the MPOs, that will still happen in its current form as long as there is no changes to the suballocation process. That is something that we will be tightly watching. If there's an issue between the state, though, we still have to work with our state partners and make sure that we are navigating that process appropriately.
Thank you.
That's my question.
Okay. Thank you. Great question. Any other questions? All right, seeing none. And do we have any questions from our general public?
There's no public comment.
Well, thank you very much. I say, did you have?
We'll have our state folks, lobbyists join us now.
You know we need Jeffrey. Come on back.
Good morning, Chris Lee here from Politico Group. We're here to provide you similar update from the state level, and I think it was good scene setting there, thinking about all of the ways that the federal context is going to affect the work we're doing here in California. So wanted to start off with doing an overview of the 2024 election results. The legislature is being sworn in this afternoon across the street for the 25-26 session. Then we're going to move on to do a really brief, or trying to keep it brief, preview of 2025 state policy issues. And finally, hope to answer any questions that you might have. So Democrats are going to retain supermajority control in both houses of the legislature, despite some incremental gains from Republicans in both houses. So one Republican pickup in the Senate. Unfortunately, Senator Newman, who's been a huge proponent of transportation funding and a friend to local and regional governments on a lot of sticky issues that have come up, particularly in the transportation space, lost his seat. So former Assembly member Troy will be taking that seat. And then in the Assembly, 2 seats are flipping to Republican control, apparently at this point in time. One of those races is still very close to call. The sister of former Assembly member, now Senator Sabrina Cervantes, Clarissa Cervantes, is losing her election in the Riverside area. And then kind of deep in the Coachella Valley, Eastern Riverside County, that seat held by former Assembly member Eduardo Garcia is also flipping to Republican control. The bigger dynamic, frankly, for the legislature this year is the huge turnover of new legislators as those new term limits really start to hit. And so we're going to have 33 new legislators. It's over a quarter. And then we're going to have 3 special elections, 2 senators who weren't up for election, 1 other offices. So one's heading to Congress, one's heading to the Orange County Board of Supervisors. So we'll have 2 Senate special elections in Orange County. And then former Assembly member Vince Fong, current Congressperson Vince Fong, was on the ballot for both the Assembly and Congress, won both. But despite endorsing, there'll be a special election in Kern County as well. GO bond measures passed handily, so some opportunity there, particularly in the resources space for local governments. And then Proposition 5 failed, unfortunately, as did a lot of other progressive priorities on the ballot. Covered a lot of this already in my comments there, but pending those special elections, Democrats are going to have 75% of the Senate seats. Women will be a majority of the Senate for the first time ever, with at least 21 of 40 seats. Not sure who's going to be running for Senator Minn's seat in Irvine yet. And then women will comprise a majority of both the Democratic caucus and the Republican caucus by really significant margins. So really significant historical milestone. The Assembly is also close to gender parity, but not quite there yet. In the SACOG region, 2 new senators, really both of whom aren't new to the region. So Megan Dolly, who was formerly in the Assembly, switched over to the 1st Senate District, covers a lot of the Yuba-Sutter region, as well as the eastern parts of Placer and El Dorado County. Side note, the deferrals and accelerations from the 2022 redistricting are now done, so the districts are not confusing anymore in the Senate, who's where. And then also on that note, West Sacramento is officially back with the rest of the 3rd district after being deferred from redistricting. And then Christopher Cabaldon, who I'm sure is familiar to many of you in this room. I worked with him when I was working in Yolo County, and he was the mayor of West Sacramento, will be sworn in today representing the 3rd district. So all of Yolo County and then all the way over into parts of Sonoma County. Assembly, similar picture. Right now, 75% of the seats held by Democrats. Mentioned the Vince Fong special election, 23 new members, and then 36 of 80 members will be women, also a record high. The new members in the SACOG delegation, Heather Hadwick, who's from way up in the northeast corner, Modoc County, Alturas, taking over for Assemblymember Megan Dolly. Again, covers parts of the foothills down in Placer and El Dorado County. And then Maggie Krell from Sacramento taking over for incoming mayor Kevin McCarty, former Department of Justice prosecutor and a strong advocate of reproductive rights. Other big changes that are likely in the coming year, Senate leadership turnover is likely. Pro Tem McGuire is termed out at the end of this 2-year session. If you look back at the last 4 pro tems, Parada and Steinberg held on till the very end, but the more recent pro tems, De Leon and Atkins, both of whom were running for higher office. De Leon was on the ballot for Senate. Remember the attempt to run against Feinstein. And then Atkins, although the election isn't until 2026, is candidate for governor. Both of them lasted until spring in the 2nd year of their session. So, you know, we've seen typically more orderly leadership transitions in the Senate than what the situation was with the last Assembly turnover. But with a lot of new members and with a term limited pro tem who has been in that role, you know, a lot long, not as long as some of the prior members were, there could be a turnover sooner rather than later. Kind of unclear, also unclear what impacts the changing federal environment might have on that. Is there a, you know, rally around the flag sort of effect for Democrats in Sacramento? One thing we know for sure will be happening is a lot of turnover in some of our key committees that we focus on. So housing has become an increasingly prominent committee. The Senate Housing Chair departed, as did chairs of several other pretty significant committees. So lots of shakeup there. We expect to see those appointments announced usually mid-late December. In the Assembly, there had already been a lot of turnover and when the leadership transition happened. So not as many high-profile committees over there. That'll see new chairs for sure. Public safety might be an exception to that general comment. But we'll be watching this throughout December and keep you apprised of what those changes are, because once these seats are all filled, there's really sometimes a domino effect of other changes across the board. Also, you know, plays into leadership dynamics, right? This is pretty much old hat by now, but put the ballot measure results up. You know, I think the Prop 5 vote is unfortunate. It's unfortunate that transportation wasn't a part of it. But this outcome really is significant with I mean, consistent with polling that we'd seen over the years on the issue of lowering voter thresholds. It's just been something that's really difficult to get a majority of voters behind. And so I don't know if this issue comes back anytime soon. But again, I think really the things that I'm most focused on here is Proposition 4, where there's a lot of opportunities for local governments. And then after failing in 2020, school bonds improved their performance quite a bit. I'm not sure what to read into that. And we're going to switch now, and Kiana's going to talk a little bit about some of the top line policy priorities that we will see in Sacramento in the coming year.
Great, thanks so much. And good morning, everyone. Chris, you've really mastered the content on those election slides. I was impressed. Third time's a charm. I wanted to take over and chat with you about what we're expecting to the degree we know what to expect. As the previous presentation sort of alluded to, a lot of uncertainty with the transition in Washington, D.C. and how that interplay with a progressive governor and democratically controlled legislature will play out in the state. But one thing we know for sure will continue to be at the top of the agenda for good or for bad is the issues around climate change and particularly transportation related climate issues. The cap and trade program, which was, I believe, originally authorized in 2006, is up for renewal again. I believe this is the second time that the program will have to be renewed. While it expires in 2030, the legislature is very interested, as well as the governor, in taking up reauthorization conversations in 2025. Not only will that negotiation and debate take a significant amount of time, I think there are a lot of stakeholders interested in revisiting the continuous appropriations, where those dollars go to now, do they want to make any changes? 65% of cap and trade is continuously appropriated to primarily transit, transportation, and housing programs that organizations like SACOG and cities and counties implement at the regional and local level. And then what to do with the 35% non-continuous appropriations. I think there's a lot of interest in sort of locking those down and giving grant recipients and formula fund recipients predictability so that they can plan and implement those funds in a better way. As the presentation notes, over the life of cap and trade, it's generated $28 billion for investments in various programs. There are some structural issues in terms of the revenues declining, which is sort of the intent of the program, right? And so there's just going to be robust conversation on what a restructured potentially cap and trade looks like in 25. Whether it gets done in 2025, I think is still up for debate, but the conversation will absolutely begin next year. I think it's a little bit preaching to the choir, considering all of the healthy and robust conversations this committee and the board of directors has had on SB 375 implementation and the desire by large and small MPOs to rethink SB 375 sustainable community strategies targets, and just structurally, is it set up for success, and what could we do to make the statute and its implementation more successful? And we've also talked at length about SB1 project eligibility issues, and that an MPO that does not have an SCS approved by CARB is currently unable to compete for 2 SB1 competitive grant programs, the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program and Solutions for Congested Corridors Program. That being said, there are industry and other statewide associations that are looking to sponsor legislation that would make an MPO with an approved APS eligible to compete for those programs. So more to come on that. And then another start of what I anticipate will be a many-year conversation is what to do about declining revenues because of the gas tax due to the state's decarbonization efforts, greater fuel efficiency from internal combustion engine vehicles like
standard vehicles, hybrids, and then also the transition to zero emission vehicles. Notwithstanding, again, what could happen between a Trump administration and California in terms of waivers and sort of the incentives to get people into ZEVs. At the last CTC road user charge technical advisory committee, they identified a projected loss over 10 years of $31.3 billion from gas tax revenue. That is significant. If that materializes over the next decade, cities and counties are going to see very significant cuts to public works budgets. The state will be, cutting resources to the STIP and other critical programs. And so the construction industry is getting ready to sort of take on that issue. What makes most sense in terms of shoring up the future of transportation funding? Along the climate and transportation lines is the California State Transportation Agency's update of the Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure, which was a plan developed in 2020 as a result of Governor Newsom's executive order directing the state to maximize climate benefits from discretionary transportation spending. The most recent annual report showed significant progress in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions from every dollar of state discretionary funding invested in programs, but additional progress needs to be made in order to reach those goals. And so there are proposed actions out there open for public comment through the middle of next week around eligibility changes for those two SB1 competitive grant programs, TCEP and SCCP, really focusing on whether projects reduce or are VMT neutral in order to be sort of prioritized for funding. There's a lot of conversation around the future of pricing, which is something SACOG is venturing into. VMT mitigation banking frameworks, whether that needs to be supplemented with state level action as sort of regions try to figure out what works on the ground for them. And then a prioritization process for climate adaptation. This is really interesting. I was looking at the vulnerability assessments Caltrans did in 2019, and there is tens of billions of dollars in adaptation work that needs to occur throughout the state, and no new money necessarily to do that. So how are we going to prioritize the most critical projects first, and what does that process look like? I think I am generally happy with the way the state budget is shaping up after difficult decisions last year. The budget is projected to be roughly balanced through the end of our current fiscal year 24-25. We have seen state revenues exceed projections by approximately $5 billion, but that doesn't necessarily mean new funding to spend in the 25-6 budget because expenditures are also increasing simultaneously. Medi-Cal social services, ballot measure implications, specifically the public safety measure and what that's going to do to cost pressures on county public safety facilities. And then some reductions in the current budget aren't necessarily materializing. So $5 billion up, but sort of a wash. Things are neither in the green or necessarily further in the red.
Madam Vice Chair, through the chair, which reductions may not materialize? Can you?
There was an unallocated 10% reduction in state operating costs. So I think that's probably the biggest. So we will see when the budget comes out, how much of that has actually happened.
Again, federal uncertainty. As part of the swearing in today, the governor is calling a third special session to author. It's the first now. Oh, yeah. Okay, you're right. 25-26 legislative session officially starts at noon today. So it's the first special session of the new 2-year session. Thank you. He called it last month, so it's a little confusing. Thank you. Thank you. And that is essentially an effort to appropriate some funds for the Department of Justice for preemptive litigation because of the transition of power in Washington, D.C. So bottom line, unlikely to see new general fund for transportation infrastructure, housing, and or climate change, which after the battle we just had with REAP. I don't know, is it good or is it bad, right? As much as we love to see general fund dollars come to transportation or housing or programs that you all appropriate, it almost always comes with the fight to retain those dollars going forward, so.
Just to tack on to that a little bit, I think part of the reason is because these programs have traditionally relied on special funds. And as we just discussed, cap and trade reauthorization is a significant funding source for affordable housing and sustainable communities, for high-speed rail, for a lot of climate-related work. Got a climate bond and a potential housing bond coming back in the coming session. So just wanted to make sure it's not a totally sour note. While we don't think we're going to see general fund there, there's a lot of special fund opportunities that we'll still be paying attention to for SACOG.
Final slide before we turn it over to discussion and questions is what will happen, if anything, on the issue of open meetings again. The Brown Act flexibilities for public health and safety emergency does expire at the start of the new year. The Just Cause flexibilities for Brown Act bodies expires Jan 1 of 2026, and we anticipate legislation that will extend that authority in 2025. And then of, I think, unique interest is the potential reintroduction of AB 817 Pacheco related to advisory bodies, which did fail in 2024. Chris and I were discussing this morning what's different in 2025, right? What is going to make a difference in the potential of getting that passed? And I think potentially committee leadership and some other changes within the body, 33 new legislators, 33 new opportunities to convince them of the advantageous nature of that legislation. So we'll have to see. Anything to add on that?
Well, actually, I will say, so we've heard that on the Just Cause flexibilities, that the Special Districts Association will be working with Assemblymember Pacheco on that bill. And then we've heard on AB 817 that the California State Association of Counties will be sponsoring another attempt at that. Not sure who the author will be.
Okay. Go ahead.
We're done.
That's it.
Yep.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. Appreciate the information, and we are ready to rock and roll as we enter into the new session. Are there any other questions by board members for the presentation? Yes, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you very much. A lot going on. Appreciate the update. In terms of SB 375, you stated that the large MPOs are requesting a rethink from CARB. So is there a likely willingness from CARB to entertain, readjusting the targets?
James, do you want to talk about the response to the CARB letter?
It's a loaded question.
No, it's a great question, Dr. Thomas. So if you remember, rolling the clock back a few months, right, we were talking about, should we try to run our own bill next year to keep pushing our plan out, or should we actually try to work with our partners around the state and at the state level to actually rethink the framework? And you overwhelmingly unanimously told us, let's have a rethink. We've started to engage with CARB and the other agencies. We actually have a working group of MPOs and a number of state agencies where SACOG is represented, along with not just the four largest MPOs, but some of the other smaller and medium-sized MPOs. That is nascent. That has just started. But we had one meeting a couple of weeks ago with senior officials over at CARB on the staff side, and I think it was a very positive meeting. So as Kiana said, there's a number of things at play here, right? One of which is if we don't meet our greenhouse gas target, we're literally cut off from funding, which would be sort of equivalent to if your school is failing, we're not going to give you education funding. So we'd like to try to address that and fix that. The target year is 2035. So by the time of your next major plan update, since 27 will be minor, 2031 is major. We've got 4 years to meet a target, which is a long range planning target. So should there be further out years? Is greenhouse gas still the thing that, that is relevant? Why don't electric vehicles count? So all of those things are on the table. We definitely anticipate, and why we wanted Kiana and Chris to come back this morning, is to be spending quite a bit of time with you all and this committee next year and the following year to work on this. This is One of the biggest priorities, and I think we've said many times, we're gonna need all of you to also help on this, all hands.
To the Vice Chair,
Mhm.
just to follow up on that. So I'm glad this working group started, back up. Thank you, Chris and Kiana, for this information. Very helpful. Does CARB have the authority to adjust in a meaningful way that we can do this without legislation? I mean, I feel like it
Right,
should
so
answer itself, but
it's a great question, and CARB has sent us a response letter, which I believe we've forwarded to you all. And there's two things happening. Let's just talk about the brass tacks, right? One is legislatively, they are statutorily required to update the targets by next year. And the other thing they're doing is updating the guidelines to how all this works. And what we said, which is a word I wish we could take back and use differently now, is we requested a pause. I think a lot of the environmental advocates thought that means we were not interested in doing this anymore. We were walking away from our commitments to environmental and climate goals. That's not the case. But they are required to update. They are required to update the targets. Now they could keep them as is. And they could also, what we're really saying is work with us for 3-6 months, right? To cooperatively figure out what makes sense for a new framework. And then if that requires new legislation, let's make that part of an effort over the 2025-26 schedule. So they can't just set it all aside, but we also don't, the fact that they're doing guidelines to a process that we're asking for a rethink on, it's just something that has caught our attention and was a topic of our meeting with the CARB staff a few weeks ago, saying, can we just sort of try to set this aside for now and have a broader conversation? We do not want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but the point at which we're at now feels like we've lost a little bit of the plot and the narrative. It doesn't feel like it works, and it feels like there's just one big stick and not a lot of carrots, right? So,
well, and the reason I'm asking is, I mean, obviously, we have a deadline to introduce policy, right, to this legislative session. So I recognize that this conversation just started, but if we're not able to determine whether an outcome is going to be meaningful, we have to make a decision to seek legislation. That's, I guess, that fork in the road is going to come up soon.
yep. If you want, yeah, I mean, those are all the legislative deadlines and, bill introduction. And I think if we're having a meaningful conversation with our state partners and we begin to bring that's the most important thing. And so I'm not trying to downplay there's a clock and there's a calendar, right? And as you well know, from your last year over in the building.
Yeah, sure.
That deadline for introducing legislation happens pretty soon. And I'll look at Chris and Kiana here. But I also think if we can have substantive, meaningful conversations with the state agencies, I'm a little less, I'm maybe more hopeful, but.
Okay, great.
Go ahead if you have anything to add.
We're having a
All right, you
sidebar
have it.
about the
That one.
multitude of
Yeah.
things that could
Okay.
influence the outcome of this conversation. I think I will say that the industry and CalCog and Self-Help County likely co-sponsored legislation that allows you to compete for funding with an approved SCS an APS is a helpful interim step as SACOG, other MPOs and CARB discuss, debate, sort of negotiate the future of SB 375 from my perspective. And that is occurring outside of sort of SACOG and is a vehicle for other potential conversations as well.
And I just want to say, we want to make the implementation of the SCS a key part of the advocacy that we're going to do, whether it's on a housing bond and seeing how that can support programs like REAP, whether that's on cap and trade reauthorization and focusing on, does there need to be dedicated pots of money to MPOs to implement the sustainable community strategy? There's a lot of opportunities in this coming year. And so this conversation that the MPOs are having directly with CARB, kind of about how does the framework work, has to be paired with the external advocacy related to SB1 eligibility and the APS, as well as opportunities to pursue funding and highlighting to the new legislative members and the returning members, as well as the administration, the value that MPOs can bring if given resources to implement the SCS, and how that aligns with state priorities on affordability, on infill, on climate, right? So there's a lot of efforts that are kind of all moving at the same time, with, in some cases, different entities in the lead.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Any further questions or discussion issues, members? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment.
Well, thank you very much, and we look forward to our continuous updates on this as we move through the process in the legislature. Okay, the next item on the agenda is an update on tribal relations.
Good morning. All right. Good morning, Vice Chair, Directors. My name is Alex Coyce, and I'm on the Government and Public Affairs team at SACOG. I'm excited to be giving you an update on tribal relations over the last 2 years here. Let's get started. So the purpose of today's presentation is to update the committee on what we've been up to over the last 2 years in tribal relations. We're going to highlight successes and lessons learned. We'll start with a little bit of background and context, and I'll finish up before we get into discussion on some ideas about where we could go from here, and invite your input on the future of that tribal engagement. There are some discussion questions in your packet under item 6 that you may wish to refer to as we go along. So to help set the stage, I want to share a framework for effective tribal consultation. This is from the National Center for Environmental Conflict Resolution. They have a couple pillars here, and I think it's important to keep in mind as we go through to think about which areas we might want to lean into. You know, SACOG wants to be a good partner with tribal governments, and so we can consider first our motivation. So that's about understanding the history, legal and policy context, and very clearly articulating our intent. Relationships are that second bucket. You all know very well, relationships move at the speed of trust. So this is really about focusing on the long game rather than getting something. Leadership is key here. The way we can think about this in tribal consultation is engaging the right level of government in our work. Cultural awareness and appropriate protocol is so key. This is about understanding each tribe and their unique context and building our capacity to understand tribal perspectives. And then collaborative process design means tribes ultimately tell us what meaningful consultation looks like and when we've achieved it. All right, I'll start off with some background and context. Got a map here from nativeland.ca. You may have seen it, but we all know that since time immemorial, the Sacramento region has been the home of the Nisenan, the Southern Maidu, the Valley and Plains Miwok, Patwin Wintun peoples, and other potentially unrecognized tribes. These indigenous peoples have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many, many centuries. And as the Yo-Chi-Dee-Hii Wintun Nation has on their website, which I love, the towns and roads of today were the villages and trade routes of our past. So it's all those layers. And as I share this update with you, I want to express appreciation for the region's indigenous people's histories, their contributions, and their lives. We're not going to do a deep dive into history today. I do want to recommend that you watch or rewatch the presentation that Chairman Jesus Tarango of Wilton Rancheria gave at our September 2023 board meeting. It's a great history. We can send that out. So currently there are 5 federally recognized tribes that share geography with the SACOG region: the Yo-Chi-Dee-Hii Wintun Nation, Yolo County, Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians, El Dorado County, United Auburn Indian Community of the Auburn Rancheria, Placer County, Wilton Rancheria, Sacramento County, and Enterprise Rancheria, which has economic enterprise in Yuba County, but their rancheria lands are technically in Butte and under the Oroville Dam. There are non-federally recognized tribes as well in the region, including the Strawberry Valley Rancheria, the Tsiakim Maidu, Colfax Todd's Valley Consolidated Tribe, and the Nashville Enterprise Miwok Maidu Nishnam Tribe. There are over 10 more federally recognized tribes and several non-federally recognized tribes who consider the region part of their ancestral homelands and have a strong interest in tribal cultural resource protection in this area. Each Native Nation and Indigenous community has their own language, name, and way of defining themselves as a people. I want to go over a couple of foundational concepts that inform SACOG's tribal relations. There's a lot more here, but we'll just go briefly. So tribal sovereignty. Tribal sovereignty refers to the exclusive right for tribes to govern themselves. This sovereign status of federally recognized tribes in particular distinguishes them from other jurisdictions and from other ethnic minorities. Tribes and tribal governments are not the public. You all know that, I'm sure. Engaging with tribal governments is distinct from engaging with indigenous peoples, of which there are many folks who identify on the census as American Indian or Alaska Native in the region who maybe come from somewhere else, another tribe, another part of the country. Federal recognition, so this is about federally recognized and non-federally recognized. Federal recognition requires an act of Congress. Historically, that recognition is derived from treaties, and there's a long history of both recognition and termination of tribes by Congress. Wilton Rancheria in our region is one that regained recognition, more in the last decade or so. That's to say it's not fixed. And then it's important to note that the definition of California Native American tribes includes both federally and non-federally recognized tribes and requires consultation with both under certain state laws. And then government to government consultation. This is the highest level of government connecting with across each entity, and that's part of how the government upholds its responsibility to tribes. So for us, SACOG here, we're a federally designated NPO. We operate under federal and state law with regards to tribal consultation. At the state level, laws like AB 52 and SB 18 direct local agencies to consult with tribes under CEQA for local land use planning. And then also included, which is rather new, those top two bullet points have some have been around for a while, some are more recent, but the most recent is in SACOG's Racial Equity Action Plan. We have a program's objective to strengthen SACOG's efforts to engage and build relationships with tribal governments in partnership with local agencies in the region. And this was included because staff recognized that there was a gap in our historical efforts to meaningfully engage, and we wanted to change that. So before I get into highlights, I'm just going to pause there and see if there are any questions. Any questions? No? Okay, great. So what have we learned? What have we done? So we've really increased our internal awareness and capacity to engage. One way we've done that is through developing a draft tribal consultation policy that begins to outline SACOG requirements, definitions, and processes for tribal consultation. We're working on best practices for engagement across our programs and projects, and that still has remained internal, really focused on project managers and program managers to understand the tribal context in this region. Another big piece of what we've been doing over the last 2 years is focused on relationship building with tribes in our region. So meeting regularly with tribal government staff, leaders where they have been interested in doing so, to share what SACOG is about, what we're doing, and to really listen and learn to each tribe and to hear what they're focused on and what's important to them. We've also, as part of our ongoing requirements and doing that relationship building, we've invited consultation, government to government consultation on core programs, including the 2025 Blueprint, our long-range plan, the 2025 Metropolitan Transportation Improvement Plan, which is the MTIP, and mobility zones. This is expanded from past years and more in line with our requirements to consult. So what have we learned? I'm going to share some overarching lessons, then I'm going to go through each of those 5 tribes that I mentioned and kind of the things that we've been working on with each of them. So each tribe has unique needs. It is so important to listen and learn. In particular, we've had some great conversations about the economic and land use development strategies that each tribe is pursuing across the region, as well as other aspects of tribal government, such as environmental and cultural resource protection. We've had some initial successes, I would say, in sharing data and addressing internal gaps. So for example, United Auburn Indian Community responded to our invitation to consult on the 2025 MTIP, which is a short range. It describes in the short range, sort of, I think it's 2 to 5 years. Miguel and Jackie are going to be correcting me afterwards. It's a short range list of projects that are coming down the pipeline. They were very interested in that document, and because it gives them a clear picture of what is coming in the region, and it helps them to do their protection and stewardship work on tribal cultural resources. So knowing about those projects is very critical. We also learned that UAC is interested in our high resolution aerial photography for that tribal cultural resource work, which was very interesting. And with a different tribe, Yochidihi requested data from SACOG to support a greenhouse gas inventory. And through that request, we realized we had a gap in our data in our travel demand model. So we updated that travel demand model to better reflect the travel patterns as they relate to tribal lands and centers of economic activity. So particularly casinos out in Yolo County and others across the region. So committing to long-term relationship building, a key part of that is regular communication. It's key. Wilton Rancheria and SACOG staff have met several times, including meeting with board members. In the REI working group, I think at least one of you were there, I think 2 of you, and presenting at the full board meeting. We continue to share explored interests in trails, EV charging infrastructure, housing, and to see where there might be opportunities to partner. We met several times with Enterprise Rancheria to share information about mobility zones and learn about their economic development plans in Yuba County. They're a big player there, and we want to continue to engage. We have not been successful in connecting directly with the Shingle Springs Rancheria. We've worked with some of our partners to talk about their connections and what that looks like. We know that we are not every tribe's top priority, and we know that there are things that we want to continue to reach out about, of course, and we're going to explore what other partners might be able to guide us in doing to make that authentic connection. So so that's part of that, be proactive and seek partners. So I'll pause there.
I have a
Yeah, go ahead.
question, Vice Chair. So you said you haven't been successful in connecting with the Shingle Springs Rancheria. Is it just that they haven't, they've rebuked any offers of collaboration, or there just has been radio silence?
We haven't had a response. We did actually do a community event with their Tribal Assistance for Needy Families program, but that's slightly different from kind of the government to government work that we're trying to do.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. So looking ahead, I'm going to bring up this framework again really quick to ground us. So a couple of things that we're going to be working on internally. So we are building our internal capacity to engage, improving our communications, and increasing our staff engagement with other local, state, and federal staff who are working with tribal governments in the region. Oftentimes we hear there's so many requests for consultations and engagement that tribes get, really trying to figure out how we can piggyback where appropriate and invited to do so is a key piece for us. In terms of expanding that one-on-one engagement, we have not yet begun in earnest to connect with non-federally recognized tribes. That's an area that we want to expand into. Also streamlining our communications. It's sort of, giving sort of a regular kind of update to especially those 5 federally recognized tribes about what's coming for the year for SACOG. So they can be more prepared to be engaged throughout the year. A couple other ideas that we haven't really begun to look at, but we really want to hear from you all on and more. There are lots of different ways to develop relationships. We've seen examples in other jurisdictions and other agencies where they co-create a land acknowledgement or a formal consultation policy. Another area to explore that we've definitely heard from some of our board members about is about structure of representation and engagement. There are many different models that MPOs use in terms of how they engage with tribes. So we've heard some interest from board members about learning about those models of tribal representation at the board level. For example, SANDAG, the San Diego Association of Governments, has a well-established formal structure for their tribal partners and their tribal governments in the region. With that, these are the discussion questions. So this is, what suggestions do you have to strengthen relationships? There's some sub-questions about partnership that we hope you might be able to shed light on, given in your respective areas. And then, the vision beyond, I think, your stead here. What does a mutually beneficial relationship look like in the long term? And then this is the first time we've come, maybe in a long time, or if ever, to committee about this topic. And so we want to get your pulse on how often do you want to hear about this? What else do you want to know on this topic?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I did have a quick question. We reached out to 18 tribes, both federally and non-federally recognized, with regards to the blueprint. How many responded? Do you know?
None.
None. Okay.
Yes.
I very much appreciate that, there's been a couple of instances here. We had one tribe had asked for data with regards to vehicle miles traveled. And we were able to oblige that easily. So I think that's wonderful. And then I also understand that the United Auburn Indian community has also made a couple of requests, just for their own planning purposes and then those high reso photos. And I think, I truly appreciate that we've been able to be responsive to those requests. One thing I am sensitive to is that I want to be incredibly sensitive, but I just don't want to, for lack of a better term, force ourselves down their throat. That is something that what I've kind of gotten a little bit of feedback just from people that I know that are within tribes. I'm trying to do my own investigating and talk to folks and see, what people, how they feel with boots on the ground, and I think it's great that we extend an invitation and when there's something happening in their area and, inviting them to participate, but I don't want to force it because I don't think that forcing it is well received as well. I don't believe we've received any requests from a tribe to have a representative sit on the board or anything of that nature, but just respecting that, I'm sure that they get a lot of, especially the federally recognized tribes in particular, get a lot of people reaching out to them for a lot of different things. And so just recognizing that. So, I appreciate reaching out and offering them every opportunity to provide input as they feel is appropriate. I just don't want to push it. That's just how I feel and how, voicing again, some of the concerns that I've heard, just not wanting to push it. So, but I'd like to hear what other folks have to say. Yes, Director Desmond.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I really appreciate this effort. I was part of the REI work group when we went down and met with the representatives from Wilton. I have a couple of questions and then a couple of comments. So you mentioned Sandag in particular. Yeah, I imagine that was going to be my first question to you is what are some of the other MPOs doing in terms of a formal relationship between their JPA and tribal governments? Does Sandag or any of the other MPOs that you're aware of, have they somehow formalized an actual, seat at the table? Can you maybe flesh that out a little bit more for me?
Sure, and I think it's important to remember the context of each regional government. So I'll just quickly go down and I'll highlight Sandag. So MTC does not have a formal structure. They in the Bay Area, there are a lot of non-federally recognized tribes that don't are essentially landless. SCAG is in a similar position. I think they have a more organized group. I can double check, but it's not formal. So in the Sandag region, there are, I believe it's 17 or 18 federally recognized tribes that are in that area, and some of the early gaming tribes. So a lot of powerful tribes and a very organized regional tribal consortium. And so they have a formal tribal working group that has been I think it's delegates from the Southern California Tribal Chairpersons Association. They identify those tribal members or leaders to sit on that formal working group, and they meet regularly. They create policy documents. They have formal agreements for the consultation that they provide for their long-range planning. It's quite developed. It's a very different context that I think is important to remember as well.
But they, just to follow up on that point, the tribes themselves organize themselves into a regional consortium, it sounds like. And then with that particular group is now interfacing with.
That's right.
Okay.
There is a similar one in Central California.
Okay.
I appreciate that. But I could see us certainly evolving. I mean, certainly Wilton Rancheria, for instance, I mean, they're getting heavily involved as land use developers, as really, political players in downtown Sacramento and South County and everywhere. So I absolutely appreciate what you're saying. I think for some tribes, it's a matter really of just trying to build a relationship and obviously being very respectful about how far they want to take the relationship. But I think with others, they're probably much more eager to get involved more at a formal level. And I think it's not just the right thing to do with the tribes. It's certainly pragmatic as well for us to have developed formal partnerships with a lot of these tribes that really want to do more and identify where we can partner, for instance, on certain projects, whether those are housing development projects or major transportation projects. So I really applaud the efforts, and I'd like to learn a little more about what they're doing in some of the other MPOs and help inform our future efforts in this endeavor. So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Vice Chair, and thank you, Alex, for the presentation. I wanted to follow up on that line of thinking, and I think you've alluded to it, but the California Tribal Business Alliance does serve as like a regional body of many of the local tribes up here, and I think engaging with them would be prudent, and you'd be able to hit a lot of them all at once instead of individually, number one. And number two, if we pursued a path, and I'm interested in this, which is if we had a representation, I would suggest someone from that organization that they determined who would be appropriate. Maybe it would be a revolving type of thing as well, so that whether it's Wilton or others who might be more interested or engaged, they can serve as that representative. So again, that's just for conversations, but proposing that to them at the appropriate time, meaning when this board agrees, I think that might be a worthwhile method or path forward. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Thomas. Yes, thank you. I appreciate this discussion and bringing this to our attention. Since this is my last Policy and Innovation Committee meeting, I want to alert this board and SAGHOG to an issue that has recently surfaced in El Dorado County regarding tribal relations. And I offer this as a just an issue that bears looking into going forward. It's potentially going to be something that each jurisdiction will be facing. We have traditionally held and still do a productive relationship with our local federally recognized tribe in El Dorado County. When the Red Hawk Casino was being developed, and then later they expanded into a service station right on Highway 50, we were able to come to a mutually beneficial financial agreement with the tribe for revenue, some revenue sharing that was appropriate to both entities, recognizing they are a sovereign entity. What we have recently seen is that the tribe, as they are, federally able to do, they have been buying a lot of land in the Shingle Springs, area. And recently they purchased a fairly large plot of land right outside of Placerville, right outside of one of our big commercial districts. And there was a planned housing development on it from the 90s that just had never been developed. And so they agreed to build per the zoning of that planned development. And they offered us a sum of money in terms in order to do that. And so we were in negotiations with them. And what we found is that this land is not contiguous to the rancheria. And that's the issue that we are struggling with, that as federally recognized tribes purchase more and more land that is not contiguous to their development, where they have put in the infrastructure and supported, transportation investments with a county, that members will be utilizing our road network without contributing to our, traffic impact fees, taking property tax rolls off our coffers. And so we had difficult discussions with them. We were not able to come to agreement. It was basically, we agreed to their original offer because they were not interested in negotiating any further. And in fact, they had said that if we didn't take the offer, then they may be able to build something else. So I believe relationship building is critically important. We have to operate in an area of mutual trust and respect. But it's also really important that as more non-contiguous land is taken off our local rolls, and those developments will be using our local road network without paying for the investment, for the interchanges, for the road maintenance to support that, it is going to be a challenge that we all will need to, come to an appropriate mutually beneficial agreement. So I offer that as just future discussion points ahead.
If I could just add
Yes.
on to that really quick, and I really appreciated what Director Thomas mentioned, the transportation investments, but I also want to go back to, your comments reminded me, the spirit of AB 52. And when I learned, when I was working at the Department of Water Resources, as we were doing things that were affecting tribal lands, a lot of the criticisms with the tribes was that, hey, you just came in here to tell us what you were going to do, in terms of building a relationship, in terms of, keeping them informed. Those are things that were lacking, and thus this AB 52 that required proper, consultation with the tribe, right? So I think and this is just kind of, I think circling back to while they didn't reach out to us, or they might not be responsive, it doesn't mean that it goes unappreciated, and building that relationship, letting them know what we have in the works ahead of time before, decisions are made. I think that's the true intent behind the good tribal consultation. So.
And can I just get, that was great, that example that you gave. And I think that would also probably be helpful, because I think there are probably other lessons we can learn from Sandag and maybe some of their projects or the challenges local governments have had down there as well. I think that would help us inform, ultimately what some of our actions might be with the tribal relations. So that was really valuable. Thank you, Wendy.
Vice Chair, if I can, just because you had brought up this idea, or you'd asked the question, how many responses we get from blueprint letters? And here's my observation, Alex, please jump in here, which is over time, we have done our required consultation. We have sent out letters, right, on the things that we do, because we're required to do that, and we don't have responses, which to us is not surprising in some way, right? You say this, you all are on the board, you come here twice a month, you tell us this is complicated work, right? It gets technical, it gets in the weeds. So if you just got a letter from us, you might not respond either. And so what we've been trying to do, and Alex and the team here has really been intentional. And what we were trying to sort of set up for you is we have been trying to actually develop, as you have all just talked about, relationships, right? We have done some outreach, we have done meetings. And some of those have gone really well. I think we're at different stages with each of our federally recognized tribes, but we've really moved the needle in the last couple of years. And because, right, I think we're trying to figure out where are the areas of mutual interest. So that we can figure out, is there a partnership, right? Are there areas of, investment, right? Projects, we've mentioned the trails plan. There's a lot of interest in the trails plan, because a lot of these trails follow these older corridors that have been around for centuries. So things like that. And I would say even on the infrastructure investment side, I'm not saying we have anything, the big ahas or lessons learned, but I do think we have made, the staff here has really made an effort, and we're beginning to have relationships so that when we send a letter, and I've even seen some of these responses recently, we're now getting some responses saying, oh, actually, you know what? We know who you are. We know what this is now. And we'd love to sit down and talk this through with you. And Vice Chair, I would say there has been interest from Wilton Rancheria on representation on the SACOG board in some way, shape, or form, or a formal relationship. And we've begun to have those discussions, which is a little bit of partly today too, why we wanted to set this up, is to say, well, what have we been doing, right? What's our experience been? What have the lessons been learned? Obviously, we have 5 federally recognized, as Alex said, and many other non-federally recognized tribes. What would it look like to have a more formal partnership and representation? How does that fare? How is that not us imposing that and saying, here's our solution, right? So all of those questions are valid, but I do think that the needle has been moved, and as Director Desmond and Vice Chair Soon knows, Wilton Rancheria is really getting engaged locally here, and I think with some very positive moves on their part and investments, and so it really was just trying to set the table today, because I know there's a number of SACOG board members that have recently been asking these questions about our relationships, formal as an MPO, government to government, and engagement, more formal engagement and potential representation. So we don't have any recommendations or solutions today. This was really a setup conversation to get your feedback and your thoughts.
And I just want to, make sure that it's clear. I absolutely think that, outreach is important and collaboration is important and relationship building is incredibly important. I mean, I agree with all of that. I just don't want to be forceful of it. I just want to be cognizant of that, that if somebody, if there's a tribe that doesn't wish to engage, that we respect that and we're not going to force them. Well, everybody else is doing it. That's all. I want to be sensitive to that. I think that getting some additional information to see what others have done, as Director Desmond had suggested, is certainly something that will be advantageous to us moving forward. And again, I think that having discussions, and I'm very happy to hear that Wilton Rancheria is engaged, because not all federally recognized tribes are going to be engaged, just as Director Thomas is experiencing now. And I think that that is something that you see throughout the country. I mean, and so when you have a tribe that is engaged, that's wonderful and that's great. And you hope that you will have those kinds, but we have to also recognize that they don't need to engage with us. And we can't force that should they not wish to. And they, you try to build that relationship, and but just being respectful of that. It is a completely different sovereign nation. And, so that's really what my point is there. So, but thank you. Are there further comments or questions? Any further dialogue from the board? Seeing none, is there any public comment on this item?
There's no public comment on this item.
Okay. And this is just an information item, so we don't need to take any votes at this time. Thank you very much for the presentation. I'll have to go back and listen to that presentation. I missed that meeting, so I really will have to go back and listen to that. So I heard it was very good. So very interested in hearing more about that. All right. So next item on the agenda is we have a receive and file. Are there any questions on the fiscal year 2024-25 quarterly financial report that's been included in our packet? Any public comment on that item?
No public comment.
All right, seeing none. Next item is other matters, and this is an opportunity for any member of the board to raise an issue or to make an update that's not on the agenda. So I'd like to open it up and ask if there's anything anyone would like to add. Yes.
This is also my last meeting, so it's been a pleasure working with you guys, and I did work with SIGCOG prior to coming on town council and with the chamber, and I plan to continue that. So I plan to see and watch you guys and continue, but I thank you. And I would like to thank James personally, because he comes out to our leadership, Loomis. He comes out and he explains things for Loomis. And anyway, I just like to thank you.
Pleasure serving with you, Jenny.
Yes, thank you very much. And for all of your contributions, and we've had a personal discussion. I know you're going to be back in some form. I no doubt in my mind. So thank you very much. Anything further?
I would just like to say, and Director Nice, I'd love to see you at our December 19th full board meeting, because we have a number of directors this is going to be your last full board meeting and your last month here. So we really want to just pay respect and celebrate your service and thank you for your engagement. So hope to see you at the December 19th SACOG board meeting here in the boardroom, 9 a.m.
Yes, and with that said, we do have our next policy committee meeting on Monday, February 10th at 10 a.m. in this boardroom. And if there is no objection, we'll adjourn.